Boo. Happy New Year, everyone. It's weird to know we're in 2022. I'm still processing the last 4 years, but I'm hoping that this year is the year things start picking up for everyone and the world can relax just a little bit for once. I spent the tail end of the year chilling out, enjoying the holidays, and wondering why it was 50 degrees in the dead of December. It was there I realized that I want to start this year off nice and easy. I don't want to go crazy, I just want to play through a more laid-back game that doesn't make me want to put my head into several walls. And I know just the game to do so, but I do have one thing to talk about first. Business management games. Odds are you've heard of or have played at least one of these at some point. Those games where you're put in charge of insert random business here, and your goal is to run a successful company and make as much money as humanly possible without getting the company to go under. Game Dev Tycoon, Zoo Tycoon, Burger Tycoon, Corporation Inc., and one of the more commonly known of this type, Roller Coaster Tycoon. A game that had you running and designing your own theme park from layout, amenities, to even coaster design. Games like these fall under the subcategory of theme park simulator, the type of game where it is a business game but your main goal is to just run a theme park. Roller Coaster Tycoon in particular is still one that's pointed to a lot and finally remembered to this day. The game has an open source project, OpenRCT2, which, while requiring an original copy of the game, adds new quality of life features and reduces a lot of the restrictions left in the original game. I do have this game today, but it's not one that I grew up playing. Instead, there is one other game that is seldom discussed in the grand scheme of theme park games, but one that I remember well. A small title for the PS2, Thrillville. Thrillville was made by Frontier Developments and was published in 2006 by LucasArts in North America and by Atari in Europe. If that name sounds familiar at all, you're probably familiar with Planet Coaster. Frontier is actually the developer of both games, and I was surprised to see that. I honestly expected this company to just be another one that fizzled out sometime in the 2010s. The company's done various theme park games over the years, including having made various versions of Roller Coaster Tycoon for other platforms, 2018's Jurassic World Evolution, the 2013 release of Zoo Tycoon, as well as the previously mentioned Planet Coaster and 2019's Planet Zoo. They're also the main developer and publisher behind the Elite series, the creator of which is founder and CEO. The fact that they survived to this day and are still putting out games is nice to see. Heck, if you told me the developer of Thrillville, of all things, made Planet Coaster last year, I would have thought you were joking. Thrillville and its sequel, Thrillville Off the Rails, are both games that I have good memories of. Making coasters was a fun time back then, and I remember the minigames being pretty okay for what they were. At the same time, I might be confusing that with Off the Rails, which I clearly remember spending a lot more time with. But, you know, everybody has to start somewhere, so let's see where Frontier was as far as in-house theme park games go back in 2006. As soon as we start the game, we're introduced to our Uncle Mortimer, the local Dollar General Doc Brown and founder of Thrillville, who has seen our player character's coaster designs and wants us to be the new park manager for some more Thrillville parks. We can pick from a large number of children and teenagers to play as, we can choose a few other customization options, name ourselves, and that's about it. We're then quickly thrown into the original Thrillville Park, which serves as the game's tutorial and introduces us to the 5 types of missions: games, building, guests, upkeep, and business. You run into each of these markers and are given a small mission to do to understand what needs to be done for each of these missions. Most games' missions revolve you around getting a certain score or achieving at the game or beating a park guest in a challenge. Building missions typically require you to construct a ride, game, coaster, or racetrack with certain stats. Guest missions are essentially just park-to-guest relations in terms of needs, friendship, and romance. Yes, romance is a mechanic in Thrillville, more on that later. Upkeep is anything relating to park maintenance, and business refers to finances and other stats related to the park like value, condition, and demographics. The whole gameplay loop revolves around these missions. Once you finish a specific amount of them, you unlock the next park. Keep going until you get all the parks, and at that point, you can finish to 100%. For the sake of this video, I'll break up the game into different aspects, each with their own segment. Thrillville does have some meat on its bones despite being fairly basic for the most part, and I did find a lot more to actually talk about this time versus my last video. I have learned from M&Ms, okay? The layout of each park is very simple. You have a decently sized area to explore divided into 3 sub-areas, each with a different theme. Each park has its own build zones, power, and various needs that have to be met between food, drink, bathrooms, and various entertainment aspects. Everything is presented to you in a third-person perspective, and the park itself is a pseudo-open world. You can run around the entire park freely and go to each area on your own accord whenever you wish. All the park layouts are set up by default, and the only sense of customizability comes in the form of the build zones and loading areas for roller coasters and racetracks. The build zones give you free reign to put whatever stall, carnival ride, or game you want, provided you have the space to put it in. And roller coaster and track loading zones present you with the game's meat and potatoes, coaster and track building. While you're able to select from a bunch of pre-built coaster designs, provided you have the funding, power, and space to do so, you're allowed to design whatever track you want, and ride it too. which, for coasters anyway, I don't recommend. I rode a coaster in this game once and my emulator stroked out and locked up my entire PC mid-recording. It only happened once, so I don't know if it was the emulator or OBS having the stroke. I should mention that coaster riding within itself is pretty underwhelming, but at least you're given a dedicated scream button. You have to think about the needs of your guests too. Each park has to have these satisfied, and what is needed depends on what is available in your park at the time. Thrill, hunger, thirst, bathrooms, so on, so forth. If people are way too hungry, it wouldn't hurt to set some space aside for a pizza or burger stand, and if people want a little more excitement from your park, putting in a ride with a higher thrill rating wouldn't hurt. Placement is a good thing to think about as well. Various things in the park compete with each other, so if one thing is making money, it can pull away from other attractions. Not to mention, if the prices are too high, then people might not bother with the rides at all. Unless some rich douche enters your park, but more on him later. On occasion, you'll find various collectibles tucked away in the build zones or coaster areas. Usually it's either blueprints, money, or items related to the game's plot. Oh yeah, Thrillville has a plot. As you progress through the game, you're given more cutscenes with Mortimer, who is both happy with your progress, but also complaining about a new competing park known as Global Joy, which is not only going out of its way to drive business away from Thrillville, but also steal ideas from Mortimer to use in their own parks. Your involvement in this plot is very surface level, as some missions make mention or showcase their antics on a very basic level, between having to pick up microphones that they planted in your park, or literally dropping flyers in the park advertising themselves to Thrillville's customers, forcing your groundskeepers to clean them up. You're primarily working to make Thrillville better, and the basis of the missions sometimes ends up mentioning said competing park as the basis for having them in the first place. Speaking of staff, you also have the option of hiring people to help keep things running smoothly in the park. You have your choice of hiring entertainers, mechanics, and the aforementioned groundskeeper. Each require a set salary and have a training level, and will go around the park doing their own respective jobs. An employee's training level will naturally increase with time, but you also have the option of taking control of each worker and playing a small minigame related to their job, which levels up the employee much faster and makes them more efficient at their job. Be it keeping guests entertained, keeping the park clean, or making sure all the rides are functioning properly. The staff members are also individuals that run around the park like any other guest. You don't have to control them to keep the park in shape. Things will improve pending their training level, and the longer you keep them around, the more the training level will rise. There is a fast travel system through the map, but it's honestly just easier to hold sprint and roadrunner your way to the other attractions. Some missions do let you warp to specific guests to do challenges or allow you to start playing the game immediately. Once we get let loose into the park, the first thing anyone would want to do is build. So, let's build something. Here is where I'd argue Thrillville has most of its meat: coaster and track building. There are 3 types of major building that you can do here, and that's roller coasters, racetracks, and mini golf. For now, I'm just going to focus on the roller coasters and racetracks. Roller coasters are Thrillville's bread and butter. It's what most people come to the park for and what they're going to spend a lot of their time and money on. You can choose from a variety of coaster types, as well as a number of pre-built coaster designs that you can select from, or, if you're feeling creative, design your own coaster from various pieces. Holding L1 gives you a selection of parts that can increase the thrill aspects of your coaster depending on how you build it. Apart from money, space, and power, you have zero limits on what you can build provided you can complete the track in full. Just keep in mind that if you want multiple coasters, you have to take resources into account. So if you make one massive coaster that surrounds the entire park, you have to build around that when making another coaster, or clear out a few games and rides to get more space or power. It's the same deal if you want to make a racetrack. Honestly, it's more worth it to make these since there's a lot more interactivity in my opinion. The roller coasters are more for the guests, and yeah, you can ride them, but not only can you build unique racetracks, you can race on them too. The game will fully let you race on custom tracks provided you can finish them from beginning to end. As far as these go, that's it really. The free building aspects end here apart from the games and stalls put into the build zones. The coasters themselves are more for the guests, and as mentioned are the main source of income for the park and what brings in eventual income to the other sections of the park. Speaking of, it isn't a theme park without guests. They're your primary source of income in Thrillville, as they're the ones buying the food, drinks, souvenirs, riding your rides, and playing your games. They have money, and it's your job to take it from them. But if park goers aren't happy, then they won't give it up so easily. You have to spend a lot of time not only working to satisfy the needs of the various guests, which can be easily checked as a whole in the game's menus or individually from person to person. You also have the option to talk to each park goer individually to make friends with them, challenge them to games, and even flirt with them for a reason I can't put together. Hey, you're the park manager, who cares? Most guest missions usually have you talking to someone specifically, but sometimes you either have to play a game with one or get a certain amount of friends or sweethearts as shown here. If you walk up to any park goer and press triangle, you can check their stats and initiate conversation with them, usually introducing yourself the exact same way because there's no difference between any of the other options.
I'm the new park manager.
From here you have a variety of random topics to choose from to attempt to make friends with them. A lot of these vary from basic fun facts to general statements. You can choose between science, history, geography, the environment, animals, general compliments, and trash talking the competing park. Each park guest is different, so it's up to you to figure out what will increase the meter versus what will bring it down. What you say to one guest that worked might not necessarily work on another. Once you max out the meter, the guest becomes your friend and that's it really. Once that's done, there's no other benefit to doing so as far as I can tell. You can still talk to them, but it's the same recycled statements over and over again. Let's do a quick overview of some of the guests I had the privilege of speaking to. Asshole kid who insulted me, guy who looks like he buys crypto, legally blind parking guest, borderline clones, girl who got in the way of a kiss and I had to clip through her, discount Jeff Bezos.
What do I care about conservation? I'm rich!
Seriously, who let this guy in the park? I should note that the compliments work for everyone, but only like once or twice. You can talk about baseball till the sun goes down, but don't compliment someone multiple times. They'll think you're lying or being weird. As far as romance goes, if you're a guy talking to a girl or vice versa, you have the option to start flirting with varying degrees of success depending on if the park guest has a need for romance. All of these are just various cheesy pickup lines and actions, some of which are given immediately. Alternatively, you can hit on someone right in front of their girlfriend for extra comedy. There's also a flirting minigame where you have to fill this heart meter. If you match the color, symbol, or both, all you have to do is just fill up the meter, and honestly, it just serves to make the game less tedious. You have the option of also taking over a park guest to romance another park guest, but it's basically the same thing as doing it yourself, and you arguably have less to work with. Everything you could say as your own player character, you can also say as a random park guest, so if you brag about your involvement in the park, the other guests will immediately call BS on anything you say. One more thing I should note, this is a LucasArts published title, so Star Wars fans get a little extra treat in the form of a Star Wars themed pickup line. Yeah, I said that. For some baffling reason, you have the option to choose a Star Wars themed statement to flirt with, and as far as I was aware of, only in the flirt sections, and I don't know why.
Without a doubt, Anakin Skywalker is the coolest character in Star Wars.
That's not appropriate, man.
How about we trash talk Global Joy instead?
I hear Garrison had so many fleas, he had to start wearing a flea collar.
I love delighting in other people's suffering.
Okay, this is getting weird. How about Eco Warrior? Who doesn't like a man who cares for the environment?
I favor direct action, but I would never resort to eco-terrorism.
What? How is this flirting? I need a palate cleanser. Where's Discount Bezos?
Just because all those doctors say it's important, does that mean it really is?
Oh no. The only thing that seems normal is the cooking statements. A lot of them are fairly normal and they're just food preferences for the most part. There's nothing weird about that.
Tried some lemon pepper on my popcorn. It's killer.
Yeah, this is gonna be either half decent or really stupid, so let's just get it on with it. Yeah, don't do that. When you're not building coasters and adding things to the park, typically you're playing games. The best way that I can describe these games is more theme and difficulty versus variety. What I mean by this is that Thrillville has a few types of minigames, each with a different skin slapped onto it depending on the version you're able to build into your park. You have first-person shooters, shooting galleries, sumo, racing, bumper cars, unreleased Rocket League prototype, mini-golf, as well as various clones of arcade games. Luftwaffe 109 is just 1942, Event Horizon is just Gradius, Trojan Quest is Gauntlet, and Sparkle Island is something that I can only describe as Bubble Bobble meets Flicky in the sense that you have the ability to fire projectiles at monsters on a very Bubble Bobble-ish stage, but you also have to collect birds and get to the exit with all of them for the most points. The only real difference is the apparent fear of God. When you kill the last enemy, the music suddenly becomes this weird ambient noise and this electrical outlet looking rabbit thing shows up. If it so much as scrapes you or any of the birds, instant death. You cannot damage it either, so you escape or die. Who on the dev team decided that Thrillville needed to have a small amount of surreal horror? You also have the minigames which you can use to train your employees. Groundskeepers have you running around the park cleaning up vomit and vacuuming trash as fast as you can within a specific time limit. Entertainers throw you into a rhythm game where you point the analog stick in different directions and press the appropriate button to the beat of a song. and mechanics put you in a connect the pipes type minigame where you have to complete a circuit. The minigames aren't too much to write home about, honestly. I hated the car soccer, but Saucer Subo was pretty fun when I wasn't being bonked into the next continent over. The mini-golf itself is okay, it's your standard mini-golfing game, but when you build one in your park, you have the ability to make your own custom holes, which good on Thrillville for letting you do that. A little more customization doesn't hurt. The shooting galleries and shoot zones are okay, even if they are the same type of game with a different coat of paint put onto them. The only thing of note that I can talk about is the bumper cars. There's a voice line whenever you hit someone in them, and they often say the weirdest thing I've ever heard in my life.
Move it or milk it. Move it or milk it. Okay, now I'm angry. Move it or milk it. Move it or milk it.
What in the flying hell does this even mean? Thrillville looks and plays like a PS2 game, so the visuals haven't aged too well, but in the context of a third-person PS2 game with large crowds, I don't want to be too hard on it. Granted, it's also late-era PS2, I mean the PS3 was barely out by the time this released, and the Xbox 360 already had a year under its belt, but you gotta think about what's being done here. Looking at the crowds, it's nice to see the PS2 handling something like this, even though visual sacrifice had to be made given how each park guest is very limited in their movement and looks so low poly. The looks of some of the park guests honestly wouldn't be out of place in a PS1 game. Some of the clothing is literally just flat textures. The parks themselves look alright, and even the coasters themselves look pretty decent, even when the build zones are packed. I even noticed the game has a small trick to keep things running smoothly. I imagine having these crowds pushes the PS2 quite a bit, so what Thrillville does is only load areas of the park you just happen to be in. Whenever you're sprinting, you reach a certain point in the tunnel where you're forced to slow down. Back then I thought this was just the game being stupid, but from an optimization standpoint it makes sense. With how dense the park sections are in terms of things going on, especially after you built a bunch of stuff, the game needs to take a moment to breathe, so to say. So by forcing you to slow down, it gives the game time to load the next park area without interrupting the flow of the game with a loading screen to keep movement seamless and not interrupt gameplay. Because I'm pretty sure if you rendered everything all at once, your PS2 would... The music in the game isn't too bad, but I don't feel like I can really explain most of it since a good chunk of the game uses licensed music.
Certified by the border funk, I've been called down here to help you out. See, I've got everything you need in my life.
There are some decent original tracks in the game. Lupin's pretty okay, if not full of early 2000s hip-hop cheese, but there's some bizarre music types that I can only chalk up to random song selection by the game itself. I noticed the just mentioned Lupin track playing in a dinosaur-themed area, and I was very confused when I played the Entertainer minigame in Ninjaville, because you know what I think of when I think of ninjas and feudal-era Japan? Modern country music. Again, this is just random song selection for the minigame, but the song I got here, specifically 2005's I Love My Life by Jamie O'Neal, clashed so hard with the theming of the park section I was in, I couldn't help but laugh. Again, I'd play a clip, but copyright. In a way, it does feel like the theme park is just blasting whatever song is popular at the time as you're walking around. If you've ever been to a place like Six Flags or went to SeaWorld for the night shows, you know exactly what I mean. The pre-rendered cutscenes are good for what they are. Pre-rendered CGI in general wasn't too bad by this point, so they serve their purpose quite well. The only thing I have to say about them is that they're good at showing Mortimer as this goofball of an inventor, and they don't overstay their welcome. He's very, very animated in these cutscenes, and it's nice to see. But the best part is during the third cutscene. Mortimer dies.
Oh, wait, that's not a command.
I got the tools of the trade. I mix you up like a tall glass of sucking egg. I rock them sticks and
That's it?
Once you finish the needed amount of missions in Park 4, the last park you get to mess around in is more for completion's sake if you're the kind of person who likes to do all the things. Mortimer ends up using Global Joy's microphones against them and manages to get them to build a theme park themed after lice of all things. It ends up bombing so badly it bankrupts the owner on top of the lawsuit he's going to give him.
Along with the $4 billion lawsuit I filed against him for intellectual property theft.
Good God, you're given one last chunk of exposition and you have free reign over this park within the confines of the game. There's only 8 missions this time and they're pretty basic on paper. Get a game's high score, build a nice coaster, keep the park working properly, blah blah blah. Speaking of things working properly, this wouldn't be a 2000s video game without some jank, now would it? And much to my surprise, Thrillville actually held up quite well. Granted, I'm emulating this as well, but PS2 emulation isn't perfect due to the console being a nightmare to emulate in general, but the emulator I used, PCSX2, seemed to handle it fairly well 95% of the time, and I only got a bit of slowdown like once. The only real issues were controls and some wonkiness towards the end. Apart from watching a group of park goers walk clean into a wall, there were a few guests that, for some reason, spawned in at twice the size of normal guests and eventually just shrank back down. I have no idea why this happened and I have not been able to figure out how to recreate it. I think the game just freaked out. In terms of controls, everything was fine, and I was able to move around the park well enough with the D-pad and the analog sticks. But that adapter I got turned out to be awful and kept disconnecting. Yeah, who could have seen that coming? The last leg of the game has you running around your previous parks to finish the missions you missed. I went through the trouble of getting 100% so I can properly describe how it felt doing this. And let me tell ya, it gets just a little repetitive. During some of the build missions to get specific coaster and raceway stats, sometimes it's easier to just use a pre-built track rather than go through the trial and error of adjusting your own track to make it fit the needs of a park. Additionally, once you've seen the dialogue choices a few times while doing the guest missions, it gets old since there's not much variety in the things you can say. I found it easier just to spam the X button and hope I get the right choice, not even paying attention to what I was saying half the time just to get it over with. This happened a lot very late in the game. As far as the games themselves, they're okay. Like I mentioned earlier, a lot of them are just score challenges, which usually involves some trial and error to do, but sometimes the score requirements require a very big score that you can only really get with precise actions and timing. Case in point, trampolines. I replayed this a handful of times to get a specific score and barely made it each and every time. This unsurprisingly gets annoying very quickly. Upkeep is pretty easy to do as well. Odds are you ignored the collection missions, so it's as simple as getting the collectibles you missed most of the time. Most business missions happen in the background, so as long as you build things correctly, you should be fine. The only complaint that I have here was the last park value mission required a $20,000 value, which you can't push at random points. Park value rises over time. So once you've done all the missions, pack all the zones and coaster areas, open the menu, and go make a sandwich. By the time you come back, you've beat the game. You get hit with the credits, and that's it. Game over. Congratulations. You're treated to the Thrillville entertainers dancing in the literal void to a song about playing the banjo. That is not a joke. Once again, copyright gets me, but the song that played here was Banjo Boy by Ryan Shoop and the Rubber Band. Pause the video, go listen to it, and then imagine my shock and confusion hearing this song watching cheerleaders dance in the vast emptiness of nothing. And with that, we can wrap it up from there. The only things left are the coaster designer, which is more of what we've already seen, where we can freely make coaster designs and save them, along with party mode, which is just minigames. Other than that, that's it. Once the game is done, it's done. That's everything. So what do I think of Thrillville? If you're looking for a deep strategic business sim, stick with Roller Coaster Tycoon or Planet Coaster. This game feels more geared towards that silly dream every single kid has of owning their own amusement park, and this caters to that well enough. Yeah, you can influence how the park functions in different ways, but most of your time is going to be spent building rides, talking to guests, and playing minigames. The actual, management aspect is really downplayed. The game can be finished quickly if you do the bare minimum needed to unlock all the parks, but there's still a handful of content left over following it depending on what you did and didn't do. This isn't necessarily a bad thing, but think about the presentation in Roller Coaster Tycoon versus Thrillville. It's a management sim first, and there's a clear and obvious lose condition if you don't do things correctly. I always seem to be making money in Thrillville, and no matter how crazy I went with filling the areas of the park with stalls and rides, it almost makes the loan system redundant if not unnecessary. You're always going to be making money in some capacity, so you don't need that extra, income and interest and debt to have yourself go into. I didn't even mention the loan system up to this point because you don't need it. Like I said, money comes in no matter what. Your income is going to outpace your expenses very, very quickly. Building on this, I originally had a line in here about hypothetically filling the park with bathrooms as a way of going out of your way to mess up the park, but they have no operating cost outside of how much it costs to build said bathrooms. Provided you have the money, you can build the entire park full of toilets at no detriment to anything, so long as there's a coaster somewhere to bring in cash. The game is very laid back, and like I said, it caters to that custom theme park dream by watering down most of the seriousness and putting more emphasis on games and rides. A 6 out of 10 looking back at it. Not bad at all. It sets out what it wants to do, but now I know why I spent more time in Off the Rails. It was a much better game from what I recall. I'm glad I revisited this game, and I had a good time playing it through, but I will admit this. There are far better games than Thrillville in the current day. Some games age like wine, and Thrillville aged like milk, especially how the same studio that made this is responsible for Planet Coaster, a game that fits the park management bill much better than Thrillville ever could, and has effectively filled the void left behind by the lack of a decent RCT sequel in recent years. If you want a good theme park sim for the current day and age, I'd personally stick with that. If you have some attachment to the game like I do, it's worth a revisit just for the weirdness. That said, everybody starts somewhere, and for what it is, Thrillville is okay for the time it released. Far from perfect, but still a good time to be had. Thank you for watching. Leave a like and your thoughts down below. If you liked what you saw, consider subscribing and checking out my previous videos. This was Thrillville. I'm Mr. Max. I'll see you in the next video. God's gonna regret the day I discovered Davinci's warp tool. You think these videos are bad now? They're only gonna get worse.